this water that is used for thermal management of most process fluids, right? So you need some cooling water essentially for the heat exchangers, so as to decrease the temperature of different process fluids. Now, how this cooling water is obtained? You cannot have a refrigeration unit, right? That would be too energy intensive unless you want to really cool it. I mean, below a certain atmospheric level of the, or below the ambient temperatures. In most cases, the cooling water is generally available in the Indian context at 30 to 35 degrees, not above that, and that is close to the ambient temperature. So this cooling water is a unit where you have this intimate exchange of this gas and hope I can write with my pen here. The intimate exchange of this what should I say, or what should I put it in a way, that exchange of energies or exchange of is by virtue exchange of energy due to the evaporation of the water, right? So what happens is this here during the this cooling operation, what happens is that you pass the air, the normal atmospheric air, and bring it in direct contact with the water or the processed water. And due to this, there will be evaporation of the water, right? I mean, that we'll talk about the arrangements, right? But essentially, just trying to explain you the main principle is that in this process, there will be evaporation of the water. And during this period, I mean, due to this evaporation, the cooling water temperature will go down, right? Or the circulating water temperature will go down in this process. So this is sort of evaporative cooling, I would say, evaporative cooling unit that cools down or reduce the temperature of the water in contact with the air, and this unit is typically known as the cooling tower. So let me just say this, and you will see in any process industries, though we are not having these industrial visits, but before we used to do, and any process industry will have these cooling tower, and like big cooling towers or plants are there, and there are some important operations associated with it, its design, its operation. So we'll talk about all of them in detail, right? What is its typical classification and all? We'll talk about this either today or in the coming classes, right? So generally the cooling tower looks something like this. There are separate arrangements on how does the airflow and the water flow takes place. Right, so you can have so it is very much similar to the absorption unit, or you can think of any gas liquid contact operation. So generally the air comes in from the sides, right, and you have the hot water which is sprayed from the top, and from the bottom you collect it. Okay, you collect the cold water, right, which is fed through a pump. It goes into a heat exchanger in the process unit, right, to cool other fluids. And then again it is recirculated back here. Okay, so this is the typical operation of this cooling tower. Now, depending on the airflow direction, airflow configuration, how we are going to have this, air distribution pattern inside the cooling tower actually classifies, I mean, forms the basis of the classification, right? How they are sprayed from the top. So this design of the sprayer or the atomizer, as you, whatever it is. So these all affects the internal design of the this cooling water, and essentially they play a big role in how this unit is going to perform. And as you can understand, since it comes in intimate or direct contact with the air which leaves out from this system becomes humid, right? And it takes up some of the sensible heat from water also, and in the process this humidified air is also at a higher temperature. Now the factors which influence or which directly affect the performance of the cooling water is the temperature of air, temperature of the incoming water, it's the contact efficiency of air and water in terms of the mass transfer coefficient, because as you can understand that it is both a heat transfer as well as a mass transfer operation. So the contact efficiency or the mass transfer coefficient of this operation is also important. The contact time between the air and the water, how it is making the contact, where this air and water passing through a packed column, tray tower, or direct contact. That also affects what is the uniformity of the air distribution, right, within the tower. Just a second. Why they are calling me now? So these are the factors which play a very big role, right? What is the contact time of the air and water? How the contact is made? What is the interfacial area? What is the uniformity of distribution of this air within the tower? What is the contact time? What is the temperature of the incoming water, temperature of the incoming air, humidity levels of the incoming air velocity, air pressure, all of these, I mean, you can easily understand by now, affect the performance of this cooling tower. Okay. Now, before we talk about the different, operations in the cooling tower, it is also important to understand the classification of a cooling tower, right? So, generally, the cooling towers are classified, as I was trying to say to you. Let me try to make a chart, small chart for you. So the cooling towers are specified or can be specified, I mean, based on their, as you can understand, based on their build, right? So whether they are like, package type or whether they are field type. They are also classified based on the heat transfer method. And in this case, you cannot call them to be like wet method, dry method, or the fluid type. We'll talk about them. There is another classification type based on the airflow pattern. Whether it is counterflow or whether it is cross flow, right? And it can also be made, I mean, the classifications can also be made based on the air draft condition, whether it is atmospheric, whether it is natural draft, or whether it's mechanically forced draft. So in this mechanical type of draft, there are again two types. One is known as the induced draft, and another is known as the forced draft. Okay. Let us go into the different classifications one by one. In the case of the heat transfer method, The one that I just shown you, where there is a direct contact of the, this cooling tower with respect to the with respect to the water, or directly with the water, they are generally known as the wet types. Here the heat transfer coefficient is maximum because there is direct contact of the air and the water. But there is one disadvantage in this wet method, is that there is loss of water due to evaporation. Right, the water will only cool due to evaporation, and since this is open to the, directly to the dry air, so there is lot of evaporation, there is loss of water, right? I mean, you may not think why evaporation is drying or loss of water due to evaporation, is it so important? But the question is, like, when you're talking about, in a big industrial process, evaporation will account for around 6 to 10% of the loss of the water, and that is a significant amount. Moreover, there is one other important thing which also happens, is this: as the water gets continuously evaporated, the suspended solids or the dissolved solids that are present in the water will also get concentrated due to this process, right? And that is particularly a limitation, because that will lead to fouling and scaling of the different heat transfer equipments. So you cannot afford to have this, this scaling or increase of the dissolved solids present in the water below a certain threshold. Generally, these waters are the underground water or river water. So they do have a certain extent of dissolved solid materials in it, right? It could be some chloride, some hardness, chemicals due to the hardness, or some other compounds. And they will get concentrated due to this evaporation, right? So that is one issue with the wet type, towers. And the dry and the fluid type, and in the case of the dry type, is that these water comes in contact with a cold surface, right? They comes in contact to the cold surface, and that is what we mean by the dry method. Now, how do you make a surface cold is again a matter of energy involved, right? This may not be as efficient as the wet method, but in this process you do not generally have this evaporative loss. Second is the last one is the fluid type. In the fluid type, again, similar things happen. And what do you do here? I mean, in the fluid type, what do you do generally is that you have, again, the water comes in contact with a cold surface or to a cold environment, or passes through a cold tube, and these tubes are cooled by another set of cooling liquids, right? Or these cooling surfaces are generally cooled by another set of fluid, right? And they could be either you get those some kind of, like what you generally see in refrigeration or something like that, and these are like cold tubes over which the water passed, and in the process they get cooled. This is generally what's the cooling type or the fluid type, this towers, what we mean by. And in the case of dry type, it's again still the same, but this cold surface is cooled by some cold air or by some air, right? That is the difference. I mean, between the fluid and the dry types, essentially the water comes in contact with a cold surface. Now, how this cold surface is cooled, that is what the difference. In the fluid type, the cold surface is again cooled by some circulating water or some cold water, right? But whereas in the case of dry types, it is cooled with cold air or some dry means. That is the difference. But the major difference between these two types and the wet type is that there is no direct contact of this cooling water on the surface, and essentially because of this, the evaporative losses are significantly reduced. Further, the waters are not contaminated by dust and these particles that comes from the air. Though that's not a major issue, but still, in the long run, this affects a lot. So that is the classification or the difference between these wet and the dry and the cooling fluid types. Mostly the wet types are very common, but in some situations where you cannot afford to have loss of that amount of water, then it is the dry methods which should be, or the fluid method which should be preferred. In the case of airflow pattern, what we call as a counter. Yes.
Sir, I had a doubt. You said that the fluid type cooling tower uses another fluid to cool water. So what's the difference between that and let's say shell and tube or double pipe heat exchanger?
No. Just do not get confused. In the shell and tube exchangers, you cannot cool the cooling water. Right, so the whatever the cooling water that we use in the shell and tube exchanger, that has to come from some other source, isn't it? That if we are so in the heat exchangers, normally the operations that we do are, restricted towards ambient temperatures. Otherwise, we have to use some refrigerations, right? The cooling water temperature is normally 30 or 35 degrees in the Indian context. Okay, so that cooling, so if you use that cooling water in the heat exchanger, the temperature will not drop below 40 degrees. Right. So now the question is how to get this cooling water. So when you use this cooling water in the heat exchanger, this cooling water temperature will rise to 10 degrees, 12 degrees, or 15 degrees. Then how to reduce it? That water cannot be reduced again. That cannot be cooled again in the heat exchanger, because the heat exchanger needs the cooling water. So that is the reason, for the purpose of that, to make this cooling is not by heat exchanger. So this entire topic on cooling towers is to come up with a system where you can cool your water for use in heat exchangers. Okay, so these cooling waters are used in process industries in the heat exchangers to cool hot fluids. Okay, so now in this process, we have to find a way where we can cool our liquids, right? And that cannot be done in the heat exchangers because mostly they will be having hot fluids. Okay, so if there is some very, if you have generally very cold, process fluid that can be used to exchange heat and you get your cooling water. But that kind of cold process fluids you do not normally get in any industry, right? Why? Is because to maintain a fluid temperature below the ambient temperature liquid requires a lot of energy. Right, and if you are able to get that cold process fluids, why do you want to waste it in the heat exchangers? Possibly you will not waste it, right? You will possibly use it to cool another, a liquid directly, or to use that as directly as a coolant. Okay, so this purpose of getting the cooling water is to cool down your hot process fluids in the heat exchangers. And in most cases, you will see in most process industries, you will see that there are hot streams which are available. Right? It's very rare to find very cold streams. Why some cold stream will be available to you? It will come within few minutes to the atmospheric temperature. And if there are some cold fluids that are available, you do not want to heat them up. That is the reason why you want them to come into existence. Right? If some process needs some really cold water, possibly it will be like cold fluids, or the output of that particular reactor is very cold. You, to preserve the cold, right, or to preserve the low temperature, you will have first of all, you will need a lot of insulation and all these things. And then what is the use? If you want some cold fluid to exist in your process, that has some purpose, right? You just do not want it to release the temperature into the atmosphere. Otherwise, they will not exist. So if you want to have the cold water, you possibly do not want it to be used for the purpose of some other exchangers. That's the idea. Because the cost of maintenance of the cold fluid is huge. Right? So either you do that or you set up your own refrigeration system. So we are not talking about the refrigeration system here. It is about the cold water which is used to cool down process fluids which is much above the ambient temperature.
Yes, sir. So then what type of fluid is used in this fluid type cooling tower?
Right. So that in that case, it could be either some refrigerant coolants, or it could be, you know, some sort of other cold water that you are getting, something like that. Or you can have some endothermic reactions happening in place, which that is mostly in the dry case though, which transfers, or where you have a fluid chamber and that can cool down another surface. You can also have some sort of, you know, free expansion of gas, right? That is what normally you do in the air conditioning types. Okay, free this sort of fluids can also, you know, by the loss of their conversion of their internal energy, they will try to cool down a surface. So these are generally the fluid types, and dry types means you will generally use not another fluid, but directly a surface will be made cold by reducing its temperature. Possibly a Peltier cooling can be done. You can also do some contact with some dry reactions can also take place, or some, you know, dry liquids, for example solidified CO2, like this. So I should not say fluid type, maybe I should say it to be some liquid type. You can think of that way. And dry types is more of the gaseous types. Okay.
Okay,
Some
sir.
of these
Yes.
dry types exchanges are found in, cold countries, or mostly which are far away from the, it's in the upper latitudes, and they normally during the winter time there, I mean, the weather itself is very cold. Right, so even with cold air, direct contact of the cold air, you can make a surface cold, and to that you can inject your, or put your process fluid directly onto that to make it cold. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Next comes the, as I was discussing about the airflow pattern, as the counterflow and the crossflow. So in the counterflow case, the direction of the direction of the air and the water is completely opposite, like what you normally observe in counterflow double pipe exchanger. And in the crossflow, so this is one crossflow system where the air comes in from the transverse sides, right, and part of the air is not completely in counterflow, but part of them will definitely be in the counterflow. So mostly towards the exit there is counter current arrangement of air and water, but towards the exit of the water the air comes in sideways. So there is a part of the unit has sideways, this movement of the air through the chamber, and this is what we call as cross flow. So part of the unit operates under cross action, so the water and the fluid are not like completely vertically opposite to each other. So this is what we mean by the cross flow. Cross flow towers are also very common because they are easy to establish. Why? You can easily think the base in this cross flow types, the base of the units or the base of the cooling tower can be easily fixed to any support, right? And you do not need any clearance or any gap for the airflow, right? So this is the base, because the most of the air comes in from sideways, right? So if you have perforated walls, you can easily have this sideways movement from the air, and the base can be kept free, right? And you can easily put this over the base. But if you want complete countercurrent exchange, then there has to be elaborate arrangement at the base so that there is appropriate provision and clearance for the airflow is there, right? So that is one advantage of the crossflow, and that is the reason why we see most of the times there is crossflow arrangement of the cooling towers. Now coming to the air draft, this air draft mechanism, this atmospheric, natural, and then you have the mechanical induced or the forced draft. So let me just quickly try to show you some picture of the atmospheric draft. This is the natural draft. Okay, so in the case of the atmospheric draft and the natural draft, if you can see this picture in your screen, so this is a picture of the natural draft. So let us first understand the natural draft. Then I will explain you what is the atmospheric draft. I mean, they are same essentially, but the design is a little bit different. So in the case of the natural draft, the base of the, this cooling tower is really big and wide so that it can accumulate or suck in a lot of nearby air, right? And these kind of natural draft coolers you will see many places, right? And these are generally preferred because you do not need to have any assisted airflow pattern inside the unit, right? So this is what we generally call as the natural draft, where the base is really big and towards the top it's like a chimney, it moves out, so the air can come in from the bottom and move towards the, through the this entire big chimney kind of arrangement, and naturally the air flows due to convection. Now in this, a part of this unit has this, this contact of the water arrangement is made. As you can see, the hot water will come in and it will, make intimate contact with the air. And this is what we mean by the natural draft. I can also show you natural draft. So these are the pictures of a natural draft cooling tower, and they are really big and huge in size because the airflow through these towers are by natural action, right? You do not induce or you do not mechanically force this airflow through these towers, and that is to have a reasonable amount of airflow. These towers are really big and the base is quite large. In the case of atmospheric towers, it is very similar to the natural draft. The difference is that except that these things are like very wide at the bottoms, and the kind of shape that you have is more or less, like a hyperbolic curve, the surface. In the case of the atmospheric draft tower, it is like completely vertical. Atmospheric columns are not at all preferred, right? But they are easier to design and to set up, right? This is the reason why they do exist still. But they are like just straight cylinder like a chimney. But in this case of this natural draft, the base is really bottom, and that glides or that enhances the natural flow of air through these towers. Okay. Now, apart from this draft or this natural draft of the atmospheric draft, there are two other types on the mechanical draft. One is called induced draft and another is called forced draft. So let me just show you a schematic of these. So this is an induced draft. So what is the difference in the induced draft with the natural draft is that both in the induced and the forced drafts, in their mechanical types, you have a fan. Right. Now, the location of this fan makes this classification. In the case of forced draft towers, right, which is a mechanical type, you have this, fan at the entry of your air path or the air inlet. So it takes in more air by suction. Right. It's like if you place a table fan at the front of your this tower where the air goes in. If you have seen many these kind of chullas or these chimneys or these ovens where they have if they keep a small fan close to the burning area, the burning rate actually increases because the fan takes in more amount of air. So it induces, I should not say induce, but it enhances the burning rate because of more air, right? So this is the kind of arrangement that you have. The fan is placed at the entrance of the air path. So this fan takes in more amount of air from the ambient these conditions, and it pushes in more air through this tower. And there is another type known as the induced draft, where you place the fan at the exit of the air or the exit of this unit where the air leaves the system. And what happens is that this will enable, the suction force will come all the way towards the entrance. So you can think of your like, the exhaust fans that is present in your washrooms. That is the easiest example I can think of. Right, so they are present where you want the air to go out, and the air comes in through the entry door, right? And there is a induced airflow to the entire chamber. This is what you mean by the induced draft mechanism, where you place the exhaust fan or this fan at the exit of the system. Now both have their own advantage and disadvantage, right? I mean, whether it's the induced type, whether it's this forced type, they have their advantages. So I mean, what do you think about the advantage and the disadvantage in um, induced and the forced type? I mean, all of you can easily understand that these are more efficient versions than a natural draft or atmospheric draft. But the downside is that you need a fan here, which costs you energy. Right, so what is the advantage of this induced draft that you see is that the airflow velocity that you find is maximum at the the cold water outlet. So the net drop in the net what should I say, the difference in the air and the water temperatures is more, or the average difference in the water and the air temperature is more in the induced type than the forced type. Okay, and but there is also one more advantage that you see in the forced draft. Can anyone tell me that? So what do you think? There are two, in fact, advantages I will tell you in the forced draft. One is that the velocity head, is converted to the pressure head at the bottommost point. So the bottommost point, you will have the lowest pressure because the velocity is maximum there. Right, so this will very nicely set up the pressure profile through the chamber. And another big advantage is that in really big units, this fan will be placed at the bottom. Whether you are going for cross flow type or counter flow types, this will be placed at the bottom. So if it is placed at the bottom, this fan is really a heavy unit, right? It's like a blower you can think of. So this will cause very less vibration to the overall structure. Whereas in the case of induced draft, as you can understand that it is placed at the top of the unit. So the heavy unit is placed on the top, so that will be more susceptible to the vibrations and stability on the structure. There's issues of stability on the structure. Right, so that is one of the big differences, or I would say in terms of advantage or disadvantages that we find between the induced and the forced draft. Now coming to the other types, on the build types, whether it's a package type or whether it's a field type. So generally the package types are the small units, I would say. I mean, they are like package types are the small units which is like comes in a very compact way, and it can be just you open the packaging and you use it for small heat rejection purposes. It's like these units are like entirely pre-assembled and it can be delivered as a package. Right, and in the case of the field ones, they are like installation is a big issue. You really need a big floor space, and they are generally the larger ones. Right, it's just for the small and the larger ones, essentially depending on the heat requirements. I also do want to talk about, so having said all of this, I also wanted to talk about some of the important terminologies which are associated with the cooling tower operation. Let me just scribble it. One is known as the cooling range. So what do you mean by the cooling range? Is the difference of the, what should I say, T water in minus T water out. Right, so it's the cooling range that determines that how the tower design will be made. right? What is the inlet of the cooling water and what is the outlet of the cooling water through this cooling tower determines the cooling range. So as far as industrial practice is concerned, generally most cooling towers are made to operate for this range of 10 to 15 degrees, right? So if the cooling tower is designed so that it can accommodate the range of 10 to 15 degrees, you should also ensure in your heat exchanger, wherever this cooling water is used, that the temperature of the cooling water should not rise beyond this range, right? So these are coupled. Essentially, when you were talking about that the cooling water that you are introducing into the cooling tower should not be 12, 10 or to 15 degrees higher than the outlet water, and that is how is the capacity of the cooling tower, and it is designed for that, to operate for that, right? So in that case, you also need to keep in mind that in the heat exchangers where you need this this cooling water, the cooling water rise should not be more than 10 to 12 degrees, right? So how do you take into account of that? So if you anticipate that the cooling water temperature is going to rise more in the heat exchanger, then you have to increase the cooling water flow rate, right? So that the essential heat or the energy can be transferred, right, or can be extracted. So that is something to keep in mind. So cooling range is very important. There are two ways to increase the cooling range, and or let us say that the two ways to decrease the cooling range is either you can increase the cooling water outlet temperature or you can decrease the cooling water inlet temperature. Right, that could be possible ways of how the cooling water range can be changed, but all of this is coupled to the the secondary process units, that is the heat exchangers. How do you determine the capacity? So typically the capacity of a cooling tower is given in terms of kcal per hour, and this is given as C, which is nothing but the water circulation rate, in meter cube per second, into the Cp. So Cp is the specific heat capacity of water in terms of kilocalorie per kg Kelvin. And multiplied with the cooling range. Right, so this determines the capacity of the cooling tower, and you can clearly see that the cooling range plays a big role. Another important parameter is known as the approach. A. This is given as the outlet of the cooling water, or cooling water out, water out temperature, minus the wet bulb temperature of the ambient air. So please note that the water temperature cannot go below the ambient temperature, and there has to be a difference between these two. The more the difference, the better is your heat exchanger, because the cooling tower unit, because we want this approach to be higher. But again, I said the other way around. The lower is the approach, the better is your design, right? But essentially, some difference has to exist. Otherwise, the rate of heat transfer would be too slow. Okay, the rate of heat transfer also depends on the temperature grade. I mean, the temperature difference between the water temperature and the wet bulb temperature of the air. So if the difference is very low, then the thermal gradient would be too low. So heat transfer would not be fast. So there has to be a difference, right? But if the difference is also too much, then the design of the tower also will be large, isn't it? Because you cannot get your water temperature below up to a certain level. So as far as this ASME guidelines or the cooling water manufacturer guidelines is concerned, it cannot be below 2.8 degrees centigrade. So A has to be more than 2.8 degrees centigrade. For all practical purposes, this is considered to be at least there should be a difference of the 4 degrees. So now this wet bulb temperature is dependent on the air humidity, right? And you know very well that the air humidity is very different in the winter and in the rainy season, because in the rainy season humidity is very high, and in the this winter season humidity is very low. So this wet bulb temperature corresponding to the rainy season, right, corresponding to the rainy season has to be considered, right? Because if it satisfies this criteria based on the rainy season ambient temperature, right, so that will also satisfy the based on the winter temperature, because in the winter temperature, of course, the wet bulb temperature would be lower than the this rainy season temperature. So if you are able to satisfy this approach condition at the rainy season, at this 4 degrees or the high humidity season, then it will also satisfy throughout the year. So this is what we mean by the approach. There is one more term which is known as the effectiveness of the cooling tower. Right? It is given by the range divided by range plus approach. So if I try to put this in terms of the temperatures, so this is water in, water out. Right, so you can clearly understand that if the effectiveness, if the this approach is reduced, the effectiveness will increase, right? That is the thing. So everybody would like to have a lower approach, but there is a limitation. You cannot decrease the approach too much, otherwise this heat transfer efficiency will again decrease. Okay, so we'll stop here for today. And then we will continue about the the mathematics behind this cooling tower design. So anybody has any questions on this? There are some other things also regarding the cooling tower operation which we'll also need to discuss, and that is something we'll talk about possibly in the next class. I do not want to jumble too much things or information at one point of time. So anybody has any questions on the cooling tower or whatever we discussed so far? If no, then we stop here for today. Okay, we'll again continue from here in the next class. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.